Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we discuss a different true crime case. I'm your host, Elisa Bird Hill, and this week we are going to be talking about the case of Michael Peterson.
Street, please. What's wrong? My wife's in an accident. She's still breathing. What kind of accident? Still on the stairs. She's still breathing. Please. Is she conscious? What? Is she conscious? No, she's not conscious. Please. How many stairs did you fall down? Huh? How many stairs? Stairs. How many stairs? Calm down, sir. Calm down. No, 15, 20, I don't know. Please, get somebody here right away. Please. Okay, somebody is dispatching the ambulance while I ask you questions. It's a voice hill, okay? Please. Sir, somebody else is dispatching the ambulance. Okay, is she awake now? Hello?
All right. Well, I started with the 911 call because I personally think that along with Alex Murdaugh and Cindy Anthony, that it is one of the most well-known 911 calls to exist. I actually randomly will just say, Durham County 911, what's your emergency? It sticks in my head for some reason. This week we are on our third, and I would like to argue likely the most well-known Peterson man that has faced murder charges. This is the one I told you that I think I have a hot take about. I'm going to save it for the end, but I do actually think that you will be surprised where I stand. A little fun fact, I have been to the actual house where this case took place. I will, of course, post those pictures on Facebook and Instagram. The reason I think this case is so well known is likely because of the documentary that was made. It's called The Staircase. It's on Netflix. Most people in the true crime space have seen it. The interesting thing about that documentary is that it began production immediately. Cameras were up long before the trial started. We got to see Michael's defense team build their defense strategy from the ground up. It was truly one of the first examples of complete and unfiltered access to a case, and I truly do mean unfiltered. In the documentary, they talk about Kathleen's head as if it were a watermelon. They act out possible ways that the event could have occurred. They eventually fly out to Germany to meet Michael's ex-wife. It really comes across more like an early reality TV show than a true crime documentary. So, we are going to discuss today, how did Michael Peterson get to the point of having cameras follow his every move? On December 9th, 2001, Michael made that dramatic 911 call after coming in from spending the evening drinking wine by his pool and finding his wife in a large pool of blood at the bottom of the stairs. Earlier in the evening of December 8th, which is my birthday, Michael and Kathleen had watched a movie together and then taken a couple of bottles of wine down to the pool to have a relaxing night together. Kathleen came in a little earlier than Michael because she had work the next day. This was around 12:30 or 1 in the morning. The exact time is unknown. It would be an hour to an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours later, before Michael would come into the house and discover her body and place that 911 call at 2:40 a.m. on December 9th. EMTs that worked the scene would say that Kathleen's blood was dry by the time they arrived, and this would be important later when we're talking about blood spatter and things like that. Kathleen's autopsy would reveal that she had a blood alcohol level of 0.11, consistent with drinking a whole bottle of wine earlier, and it also showed that she had taken between 5 and 15 milligrams of Valium. Based on Kathleen's injuries, mostly lacerations to her head, and the amount of blood at the scene, the medical examiner ruled that Kathleen had died due to, quote, homicidal assault, which I will be honest, guys, I've studied a lot of cases, and I've never heard that term be used, especially as an official term on a report. And later, Michael's lawyer would actually say the same, so I guess it's not just me. Typically, a manner of death is accident, homicide, suicide. And then the cause of death is okay, so if it's a suicide by gunshot, and that is your cause of death, your manner and then cause. So to say that it was the manner was a homicidal assault is, in my opinion, beyond the reach of a medical examiner. You can say it's homicide, but I don't think that you are qualified to say due to an assault, personally. Others may disagree, and that's okay if you do. The medical examiner results made police suspicious that this wasn't a terrible accident or a slip and fall down the stairs, especially when considering the amount of blood at the scene. And again, maybe this is a me thing, but I am confused as to why no one is considering that she may have bled more due to the amount of alcohol in her system. It doesn't take an expert to know that alcohol thins your blood. It's going to come up in this case so many times that there was so much blood, and I get that, and I get that maybe it's something police hadn't seen before, but had they worked a case where a woman had an alcohol level of 0.11 and 7 lacerations to her head, your head bleeds a lot, and if your blood is thin from the alcohol, it's going to bleed even more. Either way, police officially started looking into theories, and considering Michael was the only other person home and that the husband usually did it, their eyes went straight to him. Before we go any deeper, I do want to rewind and tell you a little bit about the family itself. Michael Peterson was okay, I'm just going to take that again. And again, I could pause and go back, but I'm not going to. Michael Peterson was a successful writer and a former Marine. He was well known in his area for being outspoken in terms of politics in the area that he lived. Kathleen was a successful career woman, and she was a highly successful. Why am I struggling with that word so much today? She was a highly successful executive at Nortel. Together, Michael and Kathleen lived in a large home in Durham, North Carolina. This house is beautiful, guys, and really, even the pictures I will post does not do it justice because it's gorgeous. I'm not sure why the 911 call bleeped the number for the address because it's pretty easily out there. If you want to look it up, it's 1810 Cedar Street, Durham, North Carolina. It really is so beautiful. Like I said, I've been there, and it's actually hard to tell from the road as well just how much land comes with the home. In the documentary, they explain it, they call it property because it is so large. And then also another, I think it was maybe The Handmaid's Tale, was shot at this house because it's very much traditional Southern charm. Michael and Kathleen's family was a large, blended family. This marriage was neither Michael nor Kathleen's first, so they both brought kids into the relationship. Kathleen had one daughter named Caitlin, and Michael brought 4 kids with him, 2 biological sons named Clayton and Todd, and 2 adopted daughters named Margaret and Martha. The kids were all mostly adults by the time of Kathleen's death. In fact, Margaret turned 20 the day after her mother died in 2001. So, with Michael being suspect number 1, and with having the money to do so, he hired an incredible and expensive team of lawyers. The head lawyer on his case was David Rudolph. Of course, when taking on a client you'll be defending against murder charges, you do an extensive search of your client's past. And during his peek into Michael's history is when it was discovered that Kathleen was not the first woman connected to Michael that met the end of her life at the bottom of a staircase. Yes, you heard that correctly. Another woman in his life died at the bottom of the stairs. When Michael was married to his first wife, Patty, he was stationed in Germany with his marine company. Michael and Patty had Clayton and Todd already. During that time, their family became good friends with a neighbor family because they also had 2 young children. Unfortunately, the father of that family, George Ratliff, passed away unexpectedly while serving in the military. Following his death, Michael and Kathleen got even closer to the now widowed Elizabeth Ratliff and acted as family to her 2 young girls. Sadly, it would be just 2 years later that Elizabeth herself would also pass away suddenly and unexpectedly. Elizabeth's nanny found her lying at the bottom of the stairs in her home in November of 1985. The investigation into her death concluded that Elizabeth had a genetic blood clotting disorder that she was unaware of, which caused her to have a stroke. That stroke caused her to fall down the stairs. It's unclear if she was walking downstairs and the stroke occurred and she fell, or if the stroke occurred and then she was trying to get downstairs to get help and she fell. Either way, her 2 young daughters would then be placed in the custody of Michael and Patty Peterson, and they would eventually adopt them. So the earlier adopted daughters I mentioned, Margaret and Martha, those were Elizabeth's daughters. When Michael and Patty divorced in 1987, all 4 children returned home to the United States with Michael, while Patty stayed behind in Germany. It would be 10 years later before Michael would officially marry Kathleen Peterson, but they lived together for several years before they tied the knot, and the families said to have blended beautifully. Margaret would later say that Kathleen was her mother. She was so young when Elizabeth died that she didn't remember her, and Patty was kind of out of the picture pretty quickly. But she remembered Kathleen loving her and being nurturing. She even said that she was the first to brush her hair and help her learn how to be a little lady. It's honestly very sad to me that by 20, she had lost 3 mother figures, 2 of which being at the bottom of the staircase, and then the other one being a whole country away. Of course, this piece of Michael's history would have to be part of discovery. The police learned the details of Elizabeth's death. They decided they would reopen her case. With the approval of her sister, her body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed. The same medical examiner that performed Kathleen's autopsy did the second one on Elizabeth. Due to her findings, Elizabeth's cause of death was changed from accident due to natural causes to a homicide. Now, this time she didn't call it a homicidal assault, just a homicide, which is very curious to me. Authorities would later argue that even though Michael wasn't being charged with her murder, Authorities later argued that even though Michael wasn't being charged with her murder as well, that the evidence should be allowed into trial because it showed a pattern of behavior for Michael. But Michael's lawyers weren't the only ones looking at Michael's past. The police had been busy digging up their own dirt. They discovered that Michael had been having online sexual conversations with men. They found gay porn on Michael's computer and quickly came up with a theory that Kathleen must have discovered it and confronted Michael, and that would have been his motive for killing her. Michael admitted that he was bisexual and that Kathleen knew. Her family said that there was no way she knew and that she wouldn't have been okay with it. I'm going to insert my personal opinion here just for a minute. After doing a lot of research on this case, actually think that Kathleen did know and was okay with Michael exploring this side of himself. I know I just said last week that I don't think Lacey knew about Amber Frey, and I stand by that, but I do feel that this is a very different situation. These Petersons are much older, neither of them on their first marriage. Their kids are grown. Kathleen, to me, comes across as very laid back and open-minded and kind of a little hippie-esque. I do think that if there was a case of a woman who wouldn't mind, it's this one. All of her family said that Kathleen adored Michael, and I think if that were truly the case, you would want someone to be free to be themselves. So the theory that she discovered his spank bank and confronted him about it just doesn't sit right with me personally, especially since his whole family knew about his sexuality. That includes his parents, his brothers, the kids even. Michael himself went on record saying that he held his relationship in a different regard than just sex. So, again, that leads me to believe that Kathleen didn't mind him exploring outside of their relationship because she was confident in the fact that he would always come back to her. I think being in 2001 in the South and talk of any quote gay stuff was just unacceptable, and so they probably kept it somewhat quiet. But I truly think that maybe they had an open situation, or she was okay with him going out and being with men, just not women. And I don't know. To me, it all makes sense. Her family said absolutely not. But your family doesn't always know everything about you, especially, I mean, these are grown adults we are talking about with grown adult children. So, anyways, finally, in July of 2003, Michael's trial began. He was being charged with the first-degree murder of Kathleen, but no charges for Elizabeth ever surfaced. The prosecution argued that Michael Peterson had been living a double life and beat his wife to death with a fireplace blowpoke when she uncovered his secrets. They brought in many experts that said that Kathleen's injuries were consistent with a beating rather than a fall. The most convincing testimony from the prosecution came from blood spatter analyst and SBI agent Dwayne Deaver. He submitted videos to the court of a crime reenactment of him beating sponges with a replica blowpoke to create the same blood spatter that was found at the scene. David Rudolph and the rest of Michael's defense team continued to argue that Kathleen knew her husband and he had no reason to kill her. They reminded the court that the suspected weapon had never been located and Michael never left that night, so where was it? They had a very well-known blood spatter analyst for their side who said that no matter how he recreated the scene, he could never see it the same spatter that Dwayne Deaver did. He suggested that if the blowpoke would have been the weapon, cast off would have been on the ceiling and higher on the walls. He also theorized that a lot of blood had been from Kathleen coughing up blood. And again, going back to the documentary, this is something we see them try and reenact. They use different substances like ketchup and jello and things to try and cough and create the same blood spatter. It's kind of gross, honestly. He also stated that Kathleen didn't suffer a fractured skull, and the other 249 other beatings in the state of North Carolina in the past 10 years had all resulted in a fractured skull. I don't know why I didn't put his name in here, but that is Dr. Henry Lee, very, very well known in the true crime space. I'll be honest with you, this trial became more about did Michael kill her with the blowpoke than it did Michael even kill her to begin with. Until one of Michael's sons happened to be at his dad's house and come across the infamous blowpoke. It was photographed as it was found. Thankfully, they were smart enough to not touch it, and then it was bagged and turned into evidence. It was tested and proven that there was no blood or cleaning agents found on the blowpoke, so it couldn't have been the murder weapon. In those photos that were taken of it, you can see cobwebs, dust, little bugs, legs from the spiders, things like that. It was clear it had not been moved in years. The prosecution didn't offer a plan B. They never suggested the idea of intruder or the thought that maybe simply Michael had pushed her down the stairs. It was basically blowpoke or bust. Despite that, the jurors found Michael Peterson guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Michael Peterson would spend the next 8 years at Nash Correctional Facility in Nashville, North Carolina. Then, it would come out that Dwayne Deaver had sent an innocent man to prison for 17 years with a false testimony. A little sidetrack here into that case. I won't go too deep. I may cover it one day. A man was out drinking and driving and was high on heroin. He attempted to drive his car through a field, and when it stalled due to the amount of mud he was in, not in his right mind, he ditched the car and left on foot. Then he returned the next day to get his car, but the entire field was filled with police. That's when he learned that his car was just feet away from a dead body. He was arrested and charged with murder and was found guilty. And then he would spend the next 17 years in prison. Then DNA would come out that proved his innocence. When Deaver was questioned out as to how the mistake happened, he admitted that he often lied on the stand and falsified evidence to fit whatever narrative he was being told by whatever side he was hired by. He even admitted that he overcompensated his credibility to get jobs. This brought every case that he had testified in into question, including Michael Peterson's. The Peterson jury was polled, and they said that Deaver's testimony had an impact on the guilty verdict. Then he was questioned, and he admitted to tampering with the evidence in that specific case. So for those reasons, Michael Peterson was granted a new trial in 2011, 10 years after Kathleen had died. He was then released on house arrest until the new trial would begin. But would it even go back to trial? The defense had a solid case the first time and still lost. So was it worth it? It would be expensive for Michael Peterson and for the state of North Carolina. Many people involved in the case had died or just moved on or were no longer in the area. Others said they didn't trust their memory of what happened a decade prior. Somehow 2 years would go by without a new trial, so Michael was able to remove his ankle monitor and live his life free while he waited to see what the future may look like for 4 whole years. Eventually, in 2017, Kathleen's sister and daughter agreed to allow Michael to take an Alford plea, which we have talked about before. It's when a client is able to say, I maintain my innocence, but I do realize that if it went to trial, the state may have enough evidence to convict me. This had been offered to Michael multiple times, this had been offered multiple times in the past, but Kathleen's family had declined the plea because they wanted the trial. They originally thought Michael was innocent in the early days, but they saw the evidence and quickly turned on him, including Kathleen's only biological daughter, Caitlin. However, they eventually gave in due to the amount of time that it had been and wanting to get the case over with and get their closure. So, Michael took the plea and was sentenced to time served for the 8 years he had been in prison. So, at 70 years old, he was free to go. We will likely never know what happened, but I'll be honest, I think the state's case was very weak, even with Deaver's testimony. I'm not sure if I were on that jury if I could have convicted him with what they gave us. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, and in this case, I just don't think they met it. I absolutely think they left a lot of room for reasonable doubt, especially after the blowpoke was found. They had set their whole case up on this blowpoke, and then the blowpoke was found. And they didn't pivot, they didn't offer any other solution, and I think that, personally, to me, is a very weak case. What do I think happened? And I'm really not sure if y'all will believe this. You will probably think I'm being funny, but I'm really not. The first time I was introduced to this theory, I thought it was ridiculous. But as I learned and investigated more, which was a lot, if you know me, you know any free moment I get, I'm researching, I'm Googling. The more I investigated, the more and more clear it became to me that this explanation made the most sense and it actually fits all of the evidence. It's called the owl theory. Yes, an owl. On her way inside the night Kathleen died, she had been messing with a decorative reindeer in the yard that was set up for Christmas. It suggested that maybe a barred owl began attacking her while she was out there. Then, bloody and drunk and wearing flip-flops, she attempted to make her way upstairs to see how bad her injuries were, but she slipped. I think she attempted to stand and slipped in her own blood, falling again, and this time knocking herself unconscious. I personally believe that that's why they couldn't make much sense of the scene. I don't think it was one fall. I definitely don't think it was one fall from the top of the stairs. And I think that theory that, she had to fall from the very top of the stairs came from that initial phone call, the 911 call that I played at the beginning, because he was counting the stairs to see how many she could have fallen down. I don't think that's the case. I think that she probably had gone up maybe 2 or 3 stairs, and I'll post pictures, but the staircase turns. It's like 2 stairs and then it turns. There's a landing and it turns. I think that she maybe made it up 1 or 2 stairs after the landing, and then that is when she fell. Again, she wasn't unconscious the first time. She tried to stand, but blood is slippery. She's drunk. Like I said, she's wearing flip-flops. Maybe she kicked him off by this point, and I think her feet slipped in her own blood, and she fell again, hitting herself, and that's when she went unconscious, and then she laid there bleeding out until Michael came in and unfortunately found her. I truthfully don't think the injuries fit the beating because she wasn't beaten. And like I just said, it wouldn't fit just a fall because it was multiple shorter falls, having previously been injured and bleeding from the owl. There's tons of research on barred owls and their aggression, especially in the area of North Carolina. Her lacerations on her head match the claw patterns of the owl exactly. Along with this, there were tiny feathers found on her body and a twig found tangled in her blood-matted hair. I know this sounds crazy. I really do. But if you research it and read about it and look at the photos, it makes so much sense. And I know this is just a week after I said I'm typically an Occam's Razor girly, where the simplest answer is usually the truth. And somehow in this case, I'm considering that Michael Peterson knew 2 different women in his life that were found dead at the bottom of the stairs, and yet somehow he was not responsible for either of them, because I do think that Elizabeth Ratliff died of natural causes. And I do think an owl attacked Kathleen Peterson. Either way, this case always leaves me scratching my head. I would love to know what you guys think. Be sure to reach out and let me know where you stand. I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts and opinions and viewpoints. And I know people are going to tell me I'm crazy for believing the owl theory, and that's okay. So, that is it for Michael Peterson from where I stand. We have one more week of Petersons left, and we're going to wrap up this series, and then the following week the episode will come out on July 3rd, so I'm going to do a 4th of July themed episode for the 250th birthday of America, so that will be very exciting. Like I've been doing, I know I mentioned it in the closing, but please be sure to give a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen. The algorithm, when you do that, helps push the podcast out to more people. I am so grateful for everyone being here along this journey with me. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time. Bye!